One is small, one is big. The small one is to click one of these QR codes, stay connected with us. We'd love to hear more of your story. The other, slightly bigger, is to come to fieldwork with us right after this, 6:30 p.m. We've been telling everybody all summer. We're excited about this. July 20th. We put it in all caps to make it really clear. It's tonight. Looking forward to that. Last time we were there, roughly 83% of the crowd came to fieldwork, so it was a great time. Hope you can make it. If not, that is okay, but we will be hanging out and getting to know one another. The other thing I want to do for a moment is to give you some updates about Dwell Church. We've been given this one for a couple of weeks now, and I'm going to give a condensed version in case you've been here a few times, but it's not going to be so condensed that if you haven't heard it, you'll be lost. It'll be just right. That's what I'm aiming for. All right, here we go. We have been working really hard to build a sustainable financial foundation for Dwell Church. Part of the origin story of Dwell is that we were given a grant for $250,000 last year sometime in 2 allocations. We took the first allocation, which was designed for one person to work for 1 year, laying the groundwork for something like a church plant. We took that money and we just started going. Me and Lisa kind of took some of that money as salary. We also bought all this equipment and we just got going. And we said from then until the second allocation, we were going to work hard to arrive at financial sustainability so that the second allocation of funds could be used strategically. Now, we've been working crazy hard at that, and so many of you have stood up to say, Dwell Church is something I want to see be a permanent reality. And so we were aiming for $25,000 a month. That pays for our rent, Lisa and I's salary, and then a gift out into the world to some of our strategic partners. We're currently at $24,100 per month. That's incredible. We won't know until the end of July where we're at because that's when we can total it all up. So that is very exciting stuff. And as I've said, I don't know if ice cream is the move or like confetti. I don't know what we'll do. We're working on it. Cake. But what that allows us to do, skipping all these spreadsheets, all this backstory, this was our original plan of how we would spend the second allocation, because we thought we probably won't get to $25,000 a month, but we'll get part of the way there. So we will invest some of this allocation of $150,000 into our rent. We'll try to pay George Hall in a lump sum. That'll be a huge blessing to them. And then we'll be able to invest 40% of that sum, this was our original plan, into kids and students. But because we're so darn close, we're now able to invest 65% of the second allocation in developing our kids and students ministries here at Dwell Church. We already got, yes, let's give a hand for that. It's pretty amazing. And we've already got teams of people praying about what that looks like. We've had people dreaming about that for months. You can see on this last slide, it was September 14th. We were ready to do this, so we've been waiting all this time. Now, asterisk, you may know this, we were the first people to receive this grant from an organization called Center for Church Innovation, and they were pretty straightforward that they didn't know what they were doing, which was a great fit because we didn't know what we were doing. So we thought this money was going to come last November, and it did here in June. But here's my favorite slide. $95,000 are going to be invested in developing our kids and student ministries. It's pretty amazing stuff. We can all feel the world changing. And sometimes we frame that as an opportunity. Church historians tell us that the church changes everything about itself except for Jesus every 500 years in preparation for the next 500 years. We are the generation where that is beginning, and so it falls to us to decide what the church of the future will look like. And we are the ones who are going to decide what the kids' ministry of the future looks like. So we're dreaming and we're praying and we're thinking about best practices and we're talking to people all over the place. We have someone who developed what they called a contemplative kids ministry that's going to consult with us, Leslie Stahl. She's amazing. You're going to hear a lot from her at some point or another. But we are really dreaming and praying what the kids' ministry of the future looks like. From the first day that we gathered in Lisa's backyard when we started, I was like, there are way too many kids here. Is this legal? And we knew from that moment that God was calling us to dream about what a Dwell Kids ministry would look like. Alongside that, we are also investing some of this money in developing Dwell students. Because I got someone in my family who's going to be in the 5th grade, and boy, do they need a youth group, I can tell. So we're going to be developing that. We're really excited about it, and I want to thank you for being a part of it. Okay. Let's see here. We are jumping into a new teaching series called the Neuroscience of Spirituality, and I am thrilled out of my mind. We're going to science real hard in this one. I'm really excited about it. For the last 3 weeks, we talked about this. I mentioned it already. The center of the target for human life is a daily conversational friendship with Jesus. I stole this sentence from a Dallas Willard book called Hearing God. It's a great read if you'd like to. We talked for the last 3 weeks about leveling up your conversation with Jesus, investing in it in a way, or thinking about it in a way, where it becomes satisfying and fruitful to you. And one of the things we said, in the very least, is a great thing that you can say to Jesus is, will you teach me how to talk to you? Because I don't have any idea how to do it. A great place to start is to say, Jesus, if you're even there, would you speak to me? Very brave, bold prayer. We talked about a bunch of ways to level up your conversation with Jesus last week. This week, or the last 3 weeks, this week we're launching into the neuroscience of spirituality, where I'm really going to be making a scientific case for a daily spiritual practice for you. There is a problem with a way of conceiving of following Jesus that is, one day I will go to heaven when I die. Maybe that is a true and important thing. We've been making the case that it is not the main event. Instead, the Bible announces God coming here. And our spiritual practices are designed to form us in a way where we are more sensitive to the arrival of God's presence. And the neuroscience of spirituality is going to be me making a scientific case that you should be doing something in your conversation with Jesus every single day. Now, I don't know what it is for you, although I'd be happy to give you a few places to start. And I also know that we got a room full of adults here, and you know what? In 2025, it is complicated being an adult. So I know that feeling like, I got to carve out 10 minutes to do one more thing, that's tough. Yes, that's what the science says. That's what I'm going to tell you here in a moment. I'm excited about this, though, because I think there is a way that this is new, novel information that was very helpful to me. The science around the neuroscience of spirituality is shockingly strong. It is so strong. It doesn't prove that God exists. It does prove that this kind of lifestyle is hugely fruitful for you and I. And so for me, at the very least, I can take away that I haven't been fooling myself all these years. That the hunch, the thing in my guts, that it was worth continuing, it was worth keeping going despite some of the costs, despite some of the confusion and difficulty, the ways that I fought for my faith, the ways that I kept doing it when it was confusing or dark, all of that was worth it. So I'm going to be making the scientific case to you that we got to be talking with Jesus or doing something spiritual every single day. Today I want to talk about the big story of our world, because have you noticed that you can find a study that proves almost anything? Have you seen that in 2025? Big problem. One of the ways you fix that is by situating it clearly in a narrative, in a story, how you understand the world. So I want to talk for a moment about how I understand what our world is like. Some of that is going to be the relationship between faith and science, at least historically. Then I want to talk about the science itself. I'm going to cite some studies, but these are just a small selection of like a huge body of literature that is like brain scan level science of how good Christian style spirituality can be for you. And then I want to talk for a moment about the ways that Scripture anticipated these sort of scientific discoveries. That the transformation of your mind was always something in purview of the Christian faith that Jesus was calling us to. But the thing I want to talk most about today is what we're going to call neuroplasticity and spiritual formation. Neuroplasticity is the capacity for your brain to be shaped by things, and this is how you learn skills. This morning, I was out the door at 6:45 a.m. so we could head to Pacifica for a 7-year-old baseball tournament, and those boys were experiencing neuroplasticity because they've been playing every day this week. They got a lot better, and today they lost in extra innings of an elimination game. It's very sad. Some people, not me, cried. All right, what's the story that we are sort of living in? I think it's helpful to frame broadly the narrative. I want to talk first about creation. One of the things we talk about a lot at Dwell Church is in the last 30 years in New Testament scholarship, there's been a major exploratory conversation in terms of what is the gospel. And there's maybe an old gospel that I already referenced that you are already familiar with, that Jesus died for our personal sins so that we might one day escape this burning planet and move on to heaven. Turns out that if that were the gospel, it would be too small. What Jesus was instead announcing was the arrival of God's kingdom, his presence. The cross is removing the obstacles between his presence and us. And you were designed to be filled to the brim with the Spirit of the living God. That is the purpose of your life. It's interesting when we think about creation, because in the first model, creation is more like a time that someday we will return to, when there is an understanding of the Garden of Eden that maybe when we go to heaven, it will be sort of like that. We will walk with God each afternoon. And so this poses the Garden of Eden as something we return to when it's all fixed. Maybe you've heard that kind of thinking before. There's an interesting way of closely reading the text that suggests something very different with creation. See, when we imagine the Garden of Eden, it's easy to imagine it being perfect. No problems, like no mosquitoes, like no fights in your marriage, like it's all perfect, right? But instead, a close reading of Scripture suggests something different. Here's 2 examples. N.T. Wright, in his book, Surprised by Hope, he's the world's foremost New Testament scholar. He said that from Genesis, we learn that creation is good, but it is incomplete. It is designed to be completed. It is a project that God intends to work on. A different book from feminist theologian Nancy Guthrie, she wrote a lot of books actually, one called Even Better Than Eden, where she said, rather than thinking of the Garden of Eden in terms of perfection, we should think of it in terms of potential. It is a project that God intends to complete. And the people that he is going to partner with to complete it are humans, like you and me. So we think of the Garden of Eden in terms of potential and in terms of partnership. Adam and Eve are called to keep and to till the garden, to protect it and cultivate it. And I want you to keep that in your mind. This is the story we are invited to live with Jesus. In the world where we go, we are designed to be filled with Jesus' presence as we protect and cultivate the world around us. This is the potential that God built into creation that we are living out. And even though sin, or as we call it here, misery, made it so much harder, it is still God's plan to cultivate the earth in such a way that his presence can dwell there increasingly more. Creation is good, but it is incomplete. God designed you and I to partner with him to make the earth a place where he can dwell in continuing and increasing amounts. That's part of the story. So creation has an element of becoming. The world around us is becoming something. What it is becoming is a dwelling place for God. That's part of the story. Man, my formatting didn't go the way I'd hoped on this slide. Part of the story of faith and science goes like this. Sir Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, George Washington, all the European white dudes that sort of like built the world that we live in, they thought of themselves as something called deists, where God built the world, he was a clockmaker, and then he went back to his shop while the clock of the world ticked away. And so, for example, Sir Isaac Newton thought, God has built in these laws of nature for us to discover the way the cosmos works as he's designed it. That's how he thought of his work. Same with Charles Darwin. He said, animals evolve in this way that the clockmaker God has designed, and it is worshipful to learn these scientific principles as we learn more and more about this God. Now, some more Orthodox Christians thought, wow, that depicts God as far off and has nothing to do with Jesus of Nazareth. But the next generation of scientists said, you know what? Actually, science explains all of this without the clockmaker. They reduced it to a mere physical principle. Then the fundamentalists came along and said, we don't actually care about science. Here are 12 things that you have to know, you have to believe in, or you're not a Christian, you're probably going to hell. Probably a lot of people in this room have had some touch point with those guys before. Say no more. Now, something we've talked about a lot is that especially the fundamentalists had a certain idea of the structure of human knowledge. They thought of human thinking as a building. They thought of a core foundational principle that couldn't be questioned, and then they built stuff up on top of it. So if you ask them a question, they freaked out because they're like, hey, the building is wobbling whenever you ask a question. Please stop doing that. At least that's how the church I grew up in was. There's another way of thinking about it, which is that human knowledge is more like a web, where things relate to each other, they have lots of connecting points, and you can take one nodule out of the web and look at it for a minute. Do I really believe this? The web doesn't fall apart or disintegrate. It is much more stable under examination. And people who find that a comforting idea can live under the category of postmoderns. And so probably if you're living in the Silicon Valley and you came to Dwell Church, you have an idea, a conceptualization where faith and science could, in theory, be close friends. They could work together. Now, part of what we discover when we start conceiving of faith and science as close friends, as we will in this series, is that there are some claims that Christians make that science is now demonstrating to be wildly true. For example, prayer is really transformative for me. That something happens to me when I set aside time to connect with myself and with God. Something that I can't quite name, but I am certain is real. Study after study is proving that that is in fact happening to you and to me. So it helps to situate ourselves in what we think of in our relationship between faith and science. Might not have been an open question for you, but I think is helpful to say, we're going to make them best friends now. They're besties. Here we go. Finally, I think it is increasingly important to just proceed in every arena of my life as an injured 43-year-old man, but also in terms of like deeper thought with intellectual humility. What if that was the calling card of all followers of Jesus? Tim Mackey, the Bible Project guy, put it like this. Being a follower of Jesus and a student of the Scriptures is actually about having the habit of open-mindedness, to hear the Scriptures say things that I've never even thought to think before, and to learn new things from the world around me. What if we approach the world as learners? It turns out that that's exactly what Jesus defined us as. Disciple simply means learner. Now, we view things through a Jesus-centered lens. We are listening for his voice. In the Scriptures, we're listening for how he might speak to us through the Bible. But when we're out in the world, we're looking for his fingerprints on all things. It's a way of saying I'm going to learn from every experience that I have because Jesus is my teacher. And so here it is important in terms of intellectual humility to say that I am not a neuroscientist. I have no background or facility or expertise in this. I just read some books and Googled some stuff. But I'm excited to tell you what I found when I Googled it. All right, let's talk about the science. Okay, here are two foundational characters in the history of neuroscience. I'm curious if you know these stories. There was a railroad worker in the 1890s named Phineas Gage, and he was beloved by his coworkers. He was a great guy. There was an accident where a rod from part of the railroad, one of the railroad tools, pierced his skull. He didn't die, but it went all the way through, and he had this severe brain damage. But he was still able to function and do his job and be a normal person, except that everything about him was different. Something had happened physically to his brain. And at the time, they had said, we would have said everything in his personality was about his soul, his kindness, his generosity. Those things were eliminated by this injury, and he turned into a very angry and stingy man. In hindsight, we can see probably that had to do with the traumatic brain injury, right? But at the time, they would have said that was a spiritual transformation in reverse. Finally, there was an infamous teacher. This was just 25 years ago. He was like the favorite teacher in the school. And then one day it was discovered that he had developed this enormous crime ring at the school where he did all kinds of really, truly horrible things. And upon examination, it turned out that he had a brain tumor that came later to be associated with a place where there was moral logic in the brain. The physical source of moral logic, this guy had a brain tumor there. So they removed it, and he went back to being a great guy. And then 4 or 5 years later, he was arrested for a whole bunch of more horrible things. And they discovered that the tumor was back. So these are wild but physical examples of like the physical basis of what we sometimes call spirituality. Now here's where this gets quite amazing. Here are some studies. Time for science that I Googled. Studies show that you have a choice on how your brain is shaped. This is going to be, I think, a totally transformational concept for us. Here are a few studies. This is a famous one. Navigation-related structural change in the hippocampi of taxi drivers. In London, they did fMRI scans of taxi drivers and found out that the part of your brain associated with spatial reasoning was much larger for them. Interesting stuff. Now, you could ask the causality question. Did they become taxi drivers because that part of their brain was big? Or after decades of driving taxis, did they grow that muscle? Let's find out. Here's a similar but different one. Brain structures differ between musicians and non-musicians. Now, one way this talk goes is I have like a map of the brain and we talk about which parts do what. I don't know anything about that. I could have faked it, but that's not what this talk is about actually. It's about this. Mindfulness practices lead to increases in regional brain gray matter density. The thought. In the first two examples, They were physical activities, driving a car, playing a musical instrument. It could be the activity that shapes your brain. It turns out more so, it is the thinking behind the activity that shapes your brain. There's a ton of these ones. Mindfulness changes your brain quite radically. Here's an even better one. Distinct patterns of thought mediate the link between brain functional connectomes and well-being. A connectome, here's a map of the connectomes. A connectome is one of those little wires. This is how your thoughts travel in your brain. Let's use some exegetical skills in trying to figure out what this sentence says, okay? Let's work backwards. Some of those pathways are associated with well-being. And they found a link between the pathways and the well-being that is mediated or connected by the patterns of thought. That those trails that are lit up in that fMRI picture, some of them are really good for you. When that part of your brain lights up, it's because something good has happened to you. And some patterns of thought, just the patterns of thought make those parts of your brain light up. The way that you think changes the way your brain is structured. It is, in many ways, analogous to a muscle. The more that you use it, the louder you experience it. That is an amazing, transformative thing for us to be learning. But it works in reverse. Brain mechanisms of rumination and negative self-referential processing in adolescent depression. Who hasn't been there? Maybe we were all part of that study. We know exactly what that sentence means. The reality is, and one of the first neuroscientists said it this way, synapses that fire together wire together. The thoughts you are regularly thinking form pathways, highways in your brain where it's increasingly easy to think that thought. Could be that we have all heard that. But have we ever considered the reality that when we think thoughts about Jesus, that too is shaping our brain? Here are a few scriptures that I think are consonant with this idea. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies. I love that. Physical thing. You're presenting a physical thing as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Philippians 4:8, finally, beloved, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about those things. This is a mindfulness activity of controlling the way your own thoughts shape your brain and your experience of reality. But here's my favorite one. This is a Dwell Church foundational passage. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Yoke is a technical term that rabbis used for their body of teaching, his set of commandments, what you were to meditate on, what we are to be thinking about in terms of our daily conversation with Jesus. And I want to impress upon you at least the possibility that the neuroscience of spirituality suggests that if you meditate on the humble and gentle Jesus, that something physical happens to your brain. It is transformed or shaped in a new way. We're going to unpack this possibility over the next couple of weeks. Here's where this series is going. I'm making a connection between neuroplasticity and spiritual formation. Next week, we'll talk about how you and I are physically wired for community and also for moral beauty or virtue. In week 3, we'll talk about spirituality as the brain's best defense against mental illness. And in that talk, I want to tell you a little bit about my own journey of mental health. And reading the book that I'll reference there was one of the most enlightening things that I'd ever read before. It turns out that for people who suffer depression, the good things that spirituality does in your brain are even more robust and strong for people that have already suffered in some way. Isn't that a miraculous explanation of redemption? Haven't you had that place in your life where Jesus has so transformed it that you'd say, I don't know if I'm grateful for that, but gosh, I'm kind of grateful for what Jesus has done in my life. That's what we'll talk about in week 3. But putting all these things together, here's how I want us to proceed in our lives broadly, but also through this series. As we choose to have our brains shaped by our conversation with Jesus, we partner with God in transforming the world. I could have showed you studies about how when you resist the temptation to be angry, that the pathways that make it possible for you to be angry shrink a little bit. There are lots of those kinds of studies. And that is a way that God is inviting us to deliver patience into the world. I could have showed you all kinds of studies that said the muscles in your brain that let you view things positively, the more you use them, the easier it is to be hopeful. There are all kinds of studies that say the more you are generous, the easier it is to be generous. The more we turn our lives over to the shaping process of talking with Jesus about what we should or shouldn't be doing, the more Jesus is delivering the fruits of the Spirit into the world around us. As we let our brains, or maybe our souls, our internal world be shaped by this conversation with Jesus, this is the way that God is fulfilling the potential that He built into creation. And so I cannot say it any stronger, but each one of us has to find a way to talk with Jesus every single day about as many things as we can. This is the way that we are shaped into world-transforming people. Let me pray for you. Oh, Jesus, would you shape us? Lord, we could have been shaped into anything. And yet, through the power of your Spirit, you called us in ways that seem arbitrary, we can't even understand, that our stories led us here to you. You called us to be shaped by you. Jesus, so would you do your beautiful, artistic, crafting work in us. Would you call us, Lord? And would you give us the power of your Spirit to join you in daily conversation? And would you shape us into the people that you have given us the potential to be? We love you, Lord. Amen.